everybody. Hope you've had a good week and having a good summer. I can't believe it is already Father's Day, but this coming Sunday is Father's Day, and I hope you're having a celebration of some type planned for your dads. Maybe you want to go on a cookout or a hike or play games in your backyard. But be sure you do something special for your dad because they do an awful lot for you and your family. Sometimes you have special interests and hobbies with your dad. You make things together. You might enjoy sports together. Maybe you go to car races or just play games in your yard. But it can be a lot of fun to do some special activities and learn things from your dad. I wanted to tell you a little bit about my dad today. My dad is 93 years old and he lives in Charlotte in an assisted living with my mom. And a little bit about him, he likes baseball, and when he was younger, he liked traveling a lot, and he likes trains. And most of all, he's devoted to his family. And he taught his family very faithfully about God. And I think two things that I remember the most are he taught us that God is faithful to us, and that we are to be faithful to him, that we're to follow him all our life. He sets a very godly example for our family. But one of his hobbies is he loves trains. And he started as a little boy in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where he grew up. And he and his dad would go out and take pictures of trains. And all of these were steam engines at that time. And he learned a lot about trains, and he was fascinated with trains. And he ended up working for the railroad. And he also has written several books, and when he was retired, called Rails Remembered, he wrote 4, and this is a picture of my grandfather when he was a young man, because he also really loved trains, and he passed that love on to his son. Well, my dad taught us to love trains. We rode trains a lot when I was little. When I was 6 weeks old, I rode my first train, and we rode all over the place on trains. And we loved it. We loved it when it was time to ride a train. We learned a lot about railroads, and he taught us a lot about that. And when I was 3, we went to Tweetsie. And this is a picture of me when I was about 3 years old, and I'm the one that's crying. I was terrified of the train and the whistle, and those are my sisters and my dad and me. And but I got over that, and I love trains now. Well, I think that we can learn a lot from trains and about railroads, about life. So I wanted to share some of that with you today. I have this little train set here from when I was a little girl, and we played with it all the time. And I wanted to talk first of all about the train tracks. Trains have to follow along on a narrow path. They can't just go where they want to. They have to follow the path. They have to make sure that there's nothing dangerous ahead. Someone has to make sure that they can continue on safely. But a train absolutely cannot travel without train tracks. And that reminds me that all through our life we need guidance, just like the train needs a track to be on. And God promises us that he will guide us, that he'll show us the right way. In Psalm 32:8 it says, "I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will guide you with my eye." So it's real important we don't get off the tracks. Also, the trains follow a narrow path. It's not very wide. It's always the same, and they have to keep it the same or the trains would fall off the track. In Matthew, Jesus tells us, "Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life." And sometimes you hear people talk about being on the straight and narrow. Well, that reminds me a lot of a train track. Well, sometimes a train is going along and something's on the track and it falls off like this. And sometimes all the cars fall off, and that's called a derailment. And it's a terrible thing because they have to get out lots of cranes and heavy equipment to get the train back on the track. And it's a pretty big deal when that happens. Well, sometimes we get off track and we have to get some help to get back on track, and The neat thing, though, is that God is there to help us get back on track. And he cleans up our messes and helps us clean up our messes and our train wrecks. And that's a comforting thing. Well, another thing about trains is there's signals along the tracks. Now, these are kind of old-fashioned signals. Now we have lighted up fancy signals that are red and green and yellow. And they tell the engineer whether it's safe to go forward or whether they're supposed to stop or whether they're just supposed to wait for a while. Well, it's important, extremely important, that engineers follow the signals and follow the directions, or trains could crash into something. And just like that for us, we have to learn and always follow God's signals, follow his way. When he says stop, we should stop or wait or go, then we follow those signals. Now, another thing now about trains is it has an engine. The engine is really the only part of the train that has any power. All the cars are just following along behind the engine. And we're like that too. Our only power comes from God. It doesn't come from us. And we don't have any power on our own. All the cars are coupled together and they follow along each other. And that reminded me how we're connected to one another, how we're supposed to help each other. We're supposed to be connected and to be a family, to be a church family. I found something that I wanted to share with you. This is a little book. It's a little hard to see, but it's The Little Engine That Could. This was my dad's copy, and it was from 1930. So 90 years old. This book is 90 years old, The Little Engine That Could. Some people also call it the Pony Engine. Well, what's really neat in this story is this train had to get over the mountain, and it couldn't get over the mountain, and it needed help, and it asked all these big fancy trains to help, and nobody could help the little train over the mountain. And finally this tiny little train comes along and said, "I'll help you." And he pushed and pushed and chugged, and you know this part where he says, "I think I can, I think I can." And he gets the train over the mountain, and he gets the things where they needed to go. And at the end he says, "I knew I could, I knew I could." And that reminds me that we're to help each other, just like the cars in the train don't have any power on their own. But sometimes somebody comes along that helps us when we're having a tough time and pushes us and helps us over the mountain and helps us out. Another neat thing about trains, interesting, is the light on the front of an engine. They all have lights because sometimes they're traveling in the dark. They want people to see them. And they don't really have to see where they're going unless there's going to be a dangerous situation. But there's always light, and they provide light for the train to not get into any trouble or cause any trouble. And it reminds me, we're in Psalms, it says, "Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path." And it does shine out brightly in dark times. We're also told to be light, that we're the light of the world, and we're not to hide our light. We're to shine our good works and give glory to God in heaven. There's a really neat quote by Corrie ten Boom about tunnels. And going through a train tunnel can be kind of dark and scary and sometimes feel kind of dangerous. But Corrie ten Boom, who had been through a lot of difficulties in her life, said, "When a train goes through a tunnel and it gets dark, you don't throw away the ticket and jump off. You sit still and trust the engineer." So when you go through dark times, you don't get off the train. You keep going and you trust God to help us through the dark time. Well, a long time ago, at train crossings, when cars would get ready to go across train tracks, there was a sign that said, "Stop, look, and listen." And it was to remind you to stop at the train tracks, to look both ways, and to listen for a train. Now they have some pretty fancy gates that are computerized and all, but this is for a long time ago. That was how people knew to look at train crossings. Well, we can use that too to remind us about how to listen and stop and listen and look for God. We want to stop sometimes. We're told to stop once a week on the Sabbath and to rest and to have refreshment, to look closely to God at those times, to think about what God's done for us. We've had to do a lot of stopping during this quarantine. We had to stop going to school. We had to stop logos. We had to stop routines. We had to stop going to stores and sports. And it was hard. We didn't want to stop those things because we liked doing them. But I've heard a lot of people say they've learned a lot during the time of stopping and the time of resting. So just use the time that we've had to stop to get closer to God, to get closer to your families, to think about what you want to do in life. Take a break. The next one, stop and look. So look is for looking for God. When we do Bible school, we do God sightings, where every day the groups at Bible school tell about places they saw God that day. Maybe they went outside and saw a rainbow or saw a funny bug, or maybe they saw somebody helping somebody, or they loved the singing. And they would write it down and we'd put it up on a bulletin board. And it's really good to help us look all day long for things that remind us about God, because He's everywhere and He's every part of your day. Sometimes at dinner, people like to talk about their God sightings, ways they saw God that day. And that's a neat thing, a way to look for God. In Micah, it said, "Therefore I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me." And the last one is to listen. We are to faithfully listen to God, to listen to His voice. When He was baptized, it says the voice came out of the clouds and says, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear Him." We're told to listen to God and to listen to His instruction. Lots of voices try to get your attention, your family and your friends, and television shows and movies and advertising and music and different things try to get your to be the voice that you'll listen to. But make sure the first voice you listen to is to God's voice. Listen to the right voices. To end, I want to say that as we stop and look and listen, here's some challenges for just this week ahead. Stop and think about God every day, all day long. Look for God sightings, for ways that you see God during the day. And listen to God's voice and follow Him. I hope you have a happy Father's Day. Give your dad a hug and tell him you love him. Bye-bye.